Walter Novaes, que dispensa apresentações, mas o Walter, bom, foi o professor de finanças corporativas de muitos de nós, foi presidente da Sociedade Brasileira de Finanças, sempre presente na sociedade, e é um prazer ouvir o Walter essa tarde sobre payout policy and taxes, conflicts between large shareholders and minority ones. Walter, a palavra é sua. Muito obrigado por aceitar o convite.
Hey, thank you very much for the invitation. First slide is just to show the name of my co-author, Mateus, who is he's in the audience. So if I can't answer anything, he will can. So we have a very competent backup for questions, for an answer. So this is the first slide. I will start with the motivation for the paper. I think it's best posed, giving a broad, not broad, but a narrow view of the literature as I see it. Okay, it's payout policies is a huge. There is an enormous amount of papers. In Brazil, Jairo Proximol alone, I think, wrote enough papers for us to have a full course. And so it's very broad. So it will be a narrow view, and I think that it helps to locate the paper. So I split the literature on payout policies, okay, and I will talk about the US alone because the two papers I like the most, they are about the US, and I will say the rest of the world, but it's everything outside the US and UK. So two, I think, very good papers, the papers that as I said, I like the most, give some hints of agents cost in payout policy in the US. That for all guys like me, I think I don't was this literature in the 1990s associating that with control issues in the US. So that and payout policy they are tightly related. So you should have some link between payout policies and agents costs. Still, the literature did not go too far in the US about this initially, and I think because it's hard to measure this agents costs, and I will. This slide I will say. But these two papers, the first two authors, they exploit a change in the tax laws in the US that cut taxes from roughly 27% to 15%. 15%, the new taxes, there is no doubt about it. The issue is what is the marginal one. Okay, but it was a very significant cut in the dividend. And the two authors, they showed that a quite large number of firms did not change the payout policies at the magnitude that you would expect when dividend tax on dividends decrease so much. And they, better than saying that some firms did not change, they kind of locate the firms that did not do the job. They are the firms that they were under some kind of I don't say weak incentive schemes, but they don't seem to have proper incentive schemes in place for the managers. So firms that did not react seem to have suboptimal incentive schemes. So that was the first paper, I think, that I believe called the attention of the profession for possible agents costs, and they said that explicitly, and it called up the attention because they tried hard to control for biases in the estimation. So they did not use specifically a different diff, but it was kind of a different diff. And there was a natural experiment that was the cut in the dividend tax. Then more recently, Heitor made a, I think everything here should know him. He published another paper about payout, agents costs in payout policy in the US. And they were more explicit in that paper about the type of agents cost. The agents cost that they refer to was the following: firms that whose managers were in kind of a trouble in terms of meeting targets for earnings per share, they seem to distort the payout policy by doing repurchase with the goal of making it easier to meet the standards, to the targets. That I think is in a sense much more intriguing, because I believe that if you ask most people, do you think that firms distort payout policies to make it easier for managers to meet targets of earnings per share? People would say, come on, they will not do that. It's not that a big thing to miss a little bit the target for earnings per share in such a way that you will repurchase shares. But some people commenting that paper call the arguments intriguing paper. This is a clue for me, like saying, I don't believe it, but you know what? The econometrics seems okay, or at least I don't understand the econometrics, and I don't know what to say, but I don't believe it. So I think it's the two papers. There are many others, okay, in the literature that I tried to post. That was the US. Now, outside the US, long before those papers, or long before the second paper, I think the argument for agents cost was more credible. I think people would say, oh, you have some bad laws protecting minority shareholders. So what is what's the problem that may exist? Is that large shareholders or controlling shareholders divert firm value and they don't pay enough dividends. So lack of dividends was kind of the norm for the understanding. And then the famous paper was this dividends around the world by Laporte, Schleif, and company. Okay, so that's the two strands of the literature that I would like. Main difficulty for both of them lies on the measurement of investment opportunities. Okay, because people could always say, for charity and size, saying dividend tax cut, something happened in the US for the new law to come, and this changed the investment opportunity heterogeneous across firms, and I'm not sure that I agree that you are capturing some distortion, or if you are mismeasuring the investment opportunities. And the same thing applies to the paper by Heitor. It's more subtle, and I don't want to discuss this paper right now. It's not the goal. So the measurement of investment opportunities is the big deal. In the US and outside the US and the UK, I say that it's even bigger, this concern, because these two papers, they worked seriously. They worked hard to do the best they could to avoid biases. Outside the United States, in this paper by Laporte and several others, they don't care. That's as a first approximation. It's Tobin skills, it's the growth of investment. And by not caring, they get that the countries with poor investment, poor laws, they pay less dividends, but they can't find evidence for what they call the substitution hypothesis. That I think most people will not remember of what that is, but I will relate to the paper that I like, that it's a bit narrow. That is a theory paper by Franklin Alley, Antonio Bernardo, and Ivo Welch, that they said something like this: firms interested in reducing, in lowering the cost of capital, they should find ways of committing not to do bad things. And then this is the substitution hypothesis. So even in Brazil or in Argentina or whatever, some firms get into agents' cost of payout policy and others not. They don't because they have this market force. So that's the thing. And Laporte and Paul, with that experiment, could not support this hypothesis. That I don't believe it. I think it's more an empirical paper problem, an econometrics paper. But so far, I don't find any paper that said, look, even in Brazil, even in other countries, these market forces will curb a little bit this agent's cost. So that's basically what our paper is about. Our paper finds an experiment that avoids this this measurement problem of investment opportunities, and it recovers this substitution of hypothesis. Of course, also identifying firms that are really screwing up things for minority shareholders. So that's what our paper is about. And okay. So our paper we bypass measurement problems, investment opportunities, exploit a feature of payout policy in Brazil. That is the ability of firms to pay cash to shareholders using dividends or interest on equity. And for the few who are not sure about this, I will explain shortly. This is not a novelty of our paper. Bolton and Marcos, it's another Brazilian, and the third author, they were the first to publish abroad about this feature of payout policy. In Brazil, and I will mention briefly in a moment, as far as I know, San Vicente and the Walter Ness were the first to study this choice between interest on equity and dividends. So what we do, and the Bolton and others, I find it a bit intriguing. They did not emphasize that with this experiment, we bypass this measurement problem. So we point this out explicitly. And what do we show by doing this, by focusing Brazil? That even with these two legal instruments that differ only with respect to taxes, there are conflicts of interest among shareholders. The shareholders that are in conflict are funds, here I include investment funds and pension funds, firms that are shareholders of other firms, and individual shareholders. So this choice, it's not a choice on whether you should pay out or not. It's a choice on whether you should use dividends or interest on equities. These three types of shareholders will disagree on each other. This will be the conflict. The fact that they disagree does not is not sufficient to say that there is an agent's cost. An agent's cost exists if whatever they agree with the shareholders of the firm it deviates from value maximization. Value maximization is choose the instrument that minimize taxes. And that's not hard to say that if the three disagree, because the tax minimizing does not satisfy anybody. So if they agree with the tax minimization rule, then no agents cost. If they disagree, someone will prevail. A class of shareholders will prevail. And for an audience of Brazilians, it's not surprising. What will be the class that will prevail? It will be the large shareholders that control firms through a pyramid structure where firms control other firms. So the relevant will be the firms in this conflict here. And I see Silvia Valadares here. I think she was the first in Brazil to show that, to mention this type of control of which firms control. So we build it on her initial work, and we also show that it's satisfied in our sum. And so that's the first thing that we have new in this paper, given the credit for this feature of payout policy to this literature, okay? And to show the conflicts and to find a way of identifying whether we will have value maximization or agents cost. And here we will use as a sorting device whether the firm is in traditional segment of B3 or is in the novo mercado. I want to put it at advance that we are not saying that novo mercado has a causal effect on the firms in terms of constraining them or deviating from value maximization. I have serious doubts. Mateus also has serious doubts. A lot of people here in Brazil have serious doubts about what novo mercado is really doing. But I think that most people will agree that even if it's not a causal effect, there is a self-selection effect. So people who prefer to list their shares on novo mercado, they are trying to signal something to investors, like, oh, I'm not that shit firm as you might think. I am going to novo mercado voluntarily. And this is in line with the evidence of Gladstone and Tema and Gladstone showing abnormal returns. So that will be our test of whether firms, whether the value maximization is in line with the substitution effect. So then what are the results if I don't have time for some reason? Look, we will show that the magnitude of the potential conflict of interest is not relevant. That if we go to the novo mercado, the conflict does not result in agents costs. If we go to the traditional, we see that agents cost of the following thing. The firm decides to pay dividend instead of interest on equity to lower taxes on the large shareholders, on the controlling shareholders. And by doing that, it increases the average taxes paid by all shareholders by 3.6%. So it's a big number. Okay, so that is the bottom line of the. Well, then given the idea, what's the outline of the presentation? I will talk about the law that introduced interest on equity with a focus on the conflicts. Then briefly we'll talk about the data, the empirical strategy that we use, and then we'll discuss some validation tests for the empirical strategy. If we have time, robustness checks, probably will not have time, and then conclusion. And that's it. Now, before moving to the law, now I want to give credit for the people who first in Brazil looked at interest on equity, and showing this graph here. This graph, it's with our data, okay? But the paper by Bolton and the paper by Walter Ness and Sam Vicente, they also identified this stuff here. Let me start to annotate to make it easier for people to follow. The first papers got this part of the data. Let me put it this way. So in 1996 was the first year that the law was in place. The law was passed on December 95. And then in 96, according to our sample, and I will explain why this is different from the others, there were 0 firms that used interest on equity in the sample by Bolton and others. 3 adopted, and then it started to increase steadily. And what caught the attention of all these authors, and my attention also, was, gee, if it's so good, if it decreases, the decrease in taxes is so significant, why it takes so long for firms to start using interest on equity? That was what called the attention of this author. In Brazil, they put as a puzzle, and Bolton changed it a little bit. I will mention when I got to a probit regression equivalent to them, and it also got to my attention. So I had a previous paper that I gave up, that I tried to say the following: look, why is it taking so long for the number of firms to adopt interest on equity? It's because there is some legal uncertainty. There is a part of the tax on interest on equity that is about crazy, and some firms were disputing in the court. Basically, the firms that were disputing in the court were the banks. Okay? They are the ones that had the guts to challenge the Treasury, the Brazil's IRS, and the others I understood like free riding. So in that paper, I tried to say what is going on is why is it taking so long? It's because there is legal uncertainty on what is the effective tax on interest on equity. And then I got some initial results, size of the firm, but I was not convinced. But okay, it's the starting process for the research. And we started to look at the data from there on, and it didn't improve a lot. So and I said, come on, I don't believe in this story that I'm telling. And I always say to my students, finance and economics is a profession for believers. If you don't believe your paper, give it up. Don't try to write a paper just because the model is beautiful or the econometrics looks nice. You must believe in the results. I didn't believe, then I gave up the approach, and it took some time until talking with Mateus, and we decided to come back to this issue. I think he was the one to have the credit, as far as I remember, when he mentioned to me, but Walter, this new taxation creates an asymmetry between the shareholders. They don't pay the same thing. When he said that, then we sat down and say, okay, now it's a different perspective. Now we might have a conflict of interest. So this is the story of the paper that normally I don't talk about the story of the paper because it's bygones. But I would like to give credit for San Vicente and Walter Nesta. I don't think they got enough in the published paper of both. I think they were not so generous as they should have been. So since we are in Brazil, I would like to give credit to these two pioneers of our profession. For now and then, I come back to the law. So what did the law do? Two instruments for paying cash, shareholders, dividends, and interest on equity, and you can use both. Okay, it's not one or the other. This is a paper about taxes. So they are equivalent, but for taxes. How can I say that they are equivalent? Is that the Brazilian SEC, CVM, it allows for the sake of mandatory dividends and minimum dividends, whatever you choose, it's fine. It fulfills the requirement. So the only difference between the two is taxes. So they don't have different shareholders get different taxes. So that's why we need taxes here. Tax on dividends, dividend payments, they are not deductible at firm level. Dividend income, not taxed either. So what happens for not being deductible? The firms lose the ability to reduce taxes at firm level, but the income is not. Now, tax on interest on equity is more complicated. On the one hand, payment of interest on equity by firms, they can deduct in the tax return. So they have this, I'm putting here just to get it, to get used. They save the corporate tax rate to see. But earnings from interest on equity, they are taxed differently from dividend income. And there are two types of taxes. There was the 15% withholding tax that was in the law from the beginning. That was in the law. It's like the 15% dividend tax cut, the dividend tax cut in the US in 2003. It took the marginal tax rate for individuals to 15%. Here, it took to 15% as well. So same number. And it's withholding. But then there was the crazy thing that I initially thought that it was explaining that study rule. The Receita Federal, the Brazilian IRS, they took literally the name interest on equity. And they decided to apply PIS/COFINS to earnings on interest on equity from firms. So PIS/COFINS is just applied to firms. And they say firms that get interest on equity, they must pay 9.2%, 25%. Apply net of of other taxes. Okay. So and then what happened? Funds they were tax exempt from the 15% withholding tax. So from the perspective of a fund that is a shareholder of a fund that pays, they will pay 9.25%. That is the PIS/COFINS. If it is an individual, then PIS/COFINS does not apply, and it pays 15%. And if it's a firm that holds another firm, shares of another firm, and get interest on earnings, it will pay the 15% and the 9.25%. So it's 1 minus 0.15 times 1 minus 0.00925 minus 1, blah, 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 multiplied by 100, and you get 22.86%. So we have three tax rates on earnings on interest on equity. So what is the tax minimizing rule? the tax minimizing rule is pretty obvious. It's say you pay interest on equity if what you save in taxes at firm level is bigger than what you force your shareholders to pay as a whole. So how do we write this in algebra? TC, that is the tax rate of the firm, must be bigger or equal than a threshold that will depend on the ownership structure of the firm, alpha, beta, and for the individuals. And this threshold is the average tax rate of the three different ones, given the ownership structure of the firm. So the threshold depends on this firm specific. So that's the tax minimizing rule. So it's not as obvious as people used to do, that were compare 15% of taxes, withholding taxes, with 34% of the maximum tax rate, saying, oh, it's obvious that you should pay interest on equity. It's not that obvious. It depends on this effective tax rate and this threshold. So that's the law. That's what we will act for. So given the law, let's talk about the data source. I have to go straight for the data source because this is from depends on the firm, the threshold. So depends on the sample. So I have to move. So the data source, financial statements are from Informatica, dividends and interest on equity payments. It's always from from CVM, you know, from Brazil's SEC, and usually you have some consulting firm that will get in touch with CVM to get for each firm how much paid on equity and how much paid with dividends. So the consultant firm for us was this one. With the paper by Bolton, there was another one. Ownership structure we get from prospectus from CVM. So this is since this is very costly to collect the data. We take data on ownership just in 1 year. We have yearly data. It will be either the IPO data or the first available at SEC. It will be one of the two. This is to save cost of collecting data. Sample selection. Sample period is from 96 to 2017. 96, it's obvious because the law started in 95. 2007, it's for two reasons. First, when we started the study, the research, it was end of 2018, something like this. So the available financial statement was till 2007. Then we thought about, should we update the data? And then we thought, okay, 2018, 2019, the presidential elections, and a lot of proposals to change taxes, interest on equity will disappear. And then we said, let's do the following. Let's keep this because we insulate ourselves from these beliefs. And if the referee asks later, we collect the data, but then we're pretty confident that it will not change anything because there was discovered the stability of that graph. So given this, the initial sample, it's an unbalanced panel of basically all public firms listed on B3. Here we include financial institutions that I think is the right thing to do. Most studies on payout policy, they exclude financial institutions because the argument is that the payout decision is very different for financial institutions and other firms. And that's fine. I think it's for those two papers in the US, I think it's perfect. But here, we're not discussing the decision for how much to pay. we are talking about the decision of whether to pay with interest on equity and dividends. And this is, the incentives are not different for financial institutions and other firms. It's just that the TC is different, but the rule should be the same. So our sample is different from both home and the others that includes financial institutions. Then we exclude. We have some exclusions. First exclusions is that if we want to make the paper of a choice between interest on equity and dividends, firms must be eligible to pay interest on equity and deduct it in the tax returns. So there are some rules I will not show for the sake of brevity, but it's in the slides that I sent to Ricardo. So bottom line, you can think of this is you can do that if the net income plus taxes is positive. If it's negative, you cannot. You can, if you want to pay interest on equity, be my guest, but you cannot deduct. So we take it's a different type of decision. So that's our sample selection. So our sample is basically of profitable firms because of this condition. Even after we impose this rule, the exclusion criteria, we look to see if the firms that paid interest on equity, they satisfy the condition. And they did satisfy, but for 3 firms, weird things. 3 firms, I think it's in the first year, they paid and they were not eligible. No, perhaps they were eligible and there was some kind of adjustments in LAIR now in the books for taxable payers that we cannot see. And if so, it's a measurement of error, and we should include that. If not, I think we are right in excluding the firms. As far as I understand, Bolton includes, they include this firms. I don't know if they checked or not, but I think we are being conservative taking this 3 out. The other exclusion criteria is firm years without distribution of profits to shareholders. So we have a sample of people who wanted to distribute cash to shareholders, and then the issue that we will study is whether they paid with the interest on equity or dividends. So final sample is a panel of 335 public firms, 3,057 firm years. We visualize the data at the percentage 0.5 and 99.5. Here's the summary statistics. I will mention just a few ones. Here's for the full sample. Here's for the firms in the traditional segment of B3, and here's the Novo Mercado. We are saying that one of the reasons for firms to list their shares on Novo Mercado is because they want to convey the signal to the market that they will treat minority shareholders fairly. And connecting with paper by Franklin and others, by doing that, they lower the cost of capital. That's the issue. Indeed, firms in the Novo Mercado, the Tobin scale, very noisy measure of investment opportunity, but still it's 1.34, and in the traditional segments is 0.96. They invest a little more in terms of capex over assets, 5% against 4%, and the firms in Novo Mercado, they are more leveraged. The leverage, where is it here? Total debt over assets, 0.28 against 0.18. So the additional ones, the ones listed, they have a low, the debt is, the leverage is lower than the average of the three. It's around 0.21 last time I saw in the Novo Mercado. So the story looks close to the story we are trying to convey for the difference between the two. The corporate tax rates, they are pretty much the same. There is no variation. 25% for Novo Mercado, 26% for the traditional one. And there is not a big imbalance between the two samples. Tax rate is a proxy. That's the crucial problem in our paper in terms of measurement. In the other papers, you can say, look, you have serious problems of measurement of investment opportunities. Here, the serious problems that we could have is measurement of the firm's corporate tax rate. Not surprisingly, you have several people. Now, there are people in accounting, starting with the accounting, that generated the methodology that finance people use to estimate marginal tax rates. So that's the problematic. So our empirical strategy focuses on minimizing errors in measurement in this tax rate. But just to start, what could go wrong? The tax rate will be tax paid, not taxes. And so if you have penalties applied to fines applied to the firm, then the tax will be too high. So we have a lot of observations with more than 50% of tax rate. That is obviously something is wrong with this measurement. And because of tax laws carry forward that in Brazil are for 2 years, sometimes you don't pay taxes, including we have observations with negative tax paid. So when we have negative tax rate, we follow the other papers and we truncate at zero. But for big numbers, we have one exercise in robustness check showing that the results do not change with truncate at 34%, as other people do. And we don't have the problem because our empirical strategy address this, is built in to address this problem. I am talking a lot. If you have questions, please go ahead. Here it's just increase in the number of firms, the fraction of firms that pay interest on equity in the example. So here it's saying that showing the firms from Novo Mercado, the fraction of firms from Novo Mercado that pay interest on equity is higher. And this is the equivalent of Bolton's main analysis that we replicate in our paper with our sample. So what Bolton and others were interested on? They want to study the probability of paying interest on equity, and then they have a bunch of covariants here in the probit. They have one for probit, one for tobit. Some cases it's censored at 0. Then they use tobit. But of course, everybody knows that this type of regression, they are very much likely they have a big endogenate problems. So what are the big endogenate problems that we see here? Take the experiment. Since it's just a choice of interest on equity or dividend.
Acho que travou, né?
Am I okay?
Walter, acho que travou aí por um último minutinho aí. Você estava falando. You were saying that since it's just a choice between interest on equity and dividends, and then you were cut.
Okay, so Tobin skill should be highly significant. Okay.
No, Walter, there was an interruption again. Please get back 2 steps.
Ricardo, following? Again, no?
Now we can hear you again.
Okay, so I will start. This is Bolton's main regression. And Bolton's main regression was to say something like this. I want to see what are the variables that are important for probability of interest on equity, for paying interest on equity. Then they look at this and saw, you see here, corporate tax rate is positive. The higher the taxes, the higher the probability. So they didn't have the corporate tax rate, but they had other measures that were even noisier than ours. But that was the flavor. And then they have premium segments. If you are in Novo Mercado, you should have a higher probability. So they recognize that you might have some agents problems, but the agents problems should be mitigated if you are in Novo Mercado. So what I'm saying is that this regression is problematic for 2 reasons. Econometrically, because look at Tobin's skill, it should be 0 because the decision does not depend on the investment opportunities. Why it's positive? Most likely because part of it's not observable, it's in the residual, and the residual is also here in the corporate tax rate. So that would be an econometric problem. But that's fine, they did the best at the time. Okay, they run this regression. This regression is not satisfactory for us because it does not pin down the agent's cost alone. We want more than this, than saying increase if you go to the Novo Mercado, you increase the probability of interest on equity. We want to see what's the agent's cost when it happens and in which firms it happens. So that's why this we did not go along with this approach. I was I think skip this thing because it's well known here. So in firms in Brazil, they are controlled by large shareholders through pyramids. So that's just to detail what's the percentage of the shareholders that are firms, that are funds, and that are individuals. And the dominant are the firms. And the same thing for control rights. Okay, that was for the sake of graph. And this table here makes use of our sample to pin down the potential for conflict of interest, assuming that if you have conflicts, and we always have here because the TC is an average of the 3, who prevails? Because of the previous slide, the one that prevails are the firms. So that's the thing. So we computed firm by firm what is the threshold, the tax minimizing threshold TC of our data. And 35% of the firms are in this range that the corporate tax rate are below the tax minimizing threshold. So here it's optimal to pay dividends according to the tax minimizing threshold. We cannot say that there are no agents costs or conflict of interest, because look at here, it's 20% is in the traditional is the is the average, is the median threshold. So if you are a fund, your threshold is 9.25%. So if you are between 9.25 and 20%, you will fight for interest on equity. Okay, so there is still the conflict. But here we are saying, funds, I don't care. I am a fund, I'm a controlling shareholder. I will not follow what you want because it's not, does not minimize taxes and there are. So this is in this region, on the other hand, then what we have, firms, remember that the threshold was 22.86%. And here's the tax minimizing. So firms want dividends, and the tax minimizing is the interest on equity. So this is the real potential for agents conflict, because the controlling shareholder will say, I want to get dividends, and the value maximization will say, no, pay interest on equity. So this is the one that we are going to focus. So here it's everybody prefers interest on equity, and here is the error of measurement. Okay, so how to analyze this this potential conflict of interest? And here is our clue for the empirical strategy. Look at this threshold, 22.86%. This is fixed by law. It's exogenous. The lawmakers fixed, and it's really fixed. We don't need to normalize anything. So when you have applications of RDD or of the discontinuous regression approach, you see in several papers, great papers, kind of saying we are normalizing. But there is some dispute whether they are normalizing or it's a choice. And I will show the paper that one that I like the most, and this is why I mentioned. Take the paper by Roberts on debt governance. So the threshold is normalized by how distant you are from the covenant. But the covenant is a choice of the bank and the borrower. So there are some people who say, oh, this is not a valid application because the threshold is not exogenously fixed. Here it is. So that's why in our approach there is no kind of dispute like that. Then, given this exogenous, the next question to apply the RDD approach, the regression discontinuity design, is do we have a discontinuity at this threshold? So, and if people are following, if firms are following the value maximization, no, there is no reason for that. We have a reason for discontinuity. If you are a firm that in this region here, slightly before smaller than 0.2286, and then you say, okay, here I want dividend because I am the self-interested controlling shareholder. But when my tax rate moves from this shareholder to the next, then the same controlling shareholder, now I want interest on equity. So evidence for agents cost is if we have a jump in the probability of paying interest on equity when we move a little bit from the left to a little bit from the right. And then it's data. We have to look at the data. Do we see this? And then I confess that when I look at that and say, gee, is there a discontinuity? When we look at the fitness of the polynomial of fourth order that we get from the codes and see, oh, there is this one, but you see it from this to this. But I look at the beams and I say, it's not obvious. So that's the place that we should have. Well, there is enough for you to continue the investigation, and that's what it is, and that's why we need a more formal analysis. But at least it's there for us to continue. Same thing if we move from the continuity of a fraction of interest on equity. instead of 0.1. And here, this is also important. The rest is the result. In the regression discontinuity design, what is another concern besides the jump here is whether there is some manipulation of figures a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right. Think of, for instance, of profits. So perhaps someone will say, take the case a paper of mine or another paper of mine. So we are discussing mandatory dividends. So if your profit is negative, you don't have to pay. If it's positive, you have to pay. Then there are incentives for firms with positive profits to change a little bit the numbers to get to negative for not paying dividends. That's the story. So we have this manipulation, and to investigate manipulation, we usually have a test called the McCrary test that is, basically speaking, plotting now instead of the average interest on equity, the density, and see if there is a discontinuity. But in our problem, we don't have problems of manipulation. I don't think that people are trying to manipulate whether their tax rate is a little bit to the left or to the right of the threshold. The question is whether we have errors in measurement that might bias the distribution to the right or to the left of the threshold. Because if we have this type of measurement errors that is biased, one thing is measurement errors, random measurement errors. That's not a problem. So it might be a bit to the left or to the right for luck or for bad luck. But if there is a bias going to the right or to the left, then this invalidates the approach. And in this sense, we use the McCrary test. The McCrary test will show that there is no type of bias in the measurement error to the left or to the right. So we can say that if we are close to the left or close to the right, exactly close really to the threshold, then that's fine. So this is the McCrary test. And for those that don't like McCrary test, this is showing that, look, if we get a bandwidth, a window around the 0.2286, then the data looks quite nice. It increases. The higher the corporate tax rate, the larger the interest on equity. So that strange measurement errors in the far right should not be important to the results. Okay, so given that, the question then is, can we say statistically that there is a jump? So that's why I put here again. And this is the empirical strategy. How do we test for the discontinuity? This is the probably dummy variable interest on equity 1 or 0. Here the tax rate, and here's the jump in the threshold. So this is the dummy variable if the tax rate is bigger or equal than 22.86%. So the estimation of rho, it will give us the estimation of rho from the right minus the estimation of rho from the left. What's the identification hypothesis? We must have a random variation around this 0.2286. What are the windows that will look for the regressions? This is in the jargon of the RDG. It's what we call the bandwidth. The bandwidth will be a window centered at 0.286 with a minus h plus h, and this h the procedure gives us endogenously. So what we have here, it's a non-parametric RDD. So we will estimate local regressions around 0.2286, and the local regression will choose this bandwidth h to minimize the mean square error of the estimate of rho. No, it's not the mean square error of the whole regression, because the focus is on the rho. Then it's quite complicated. I confess that I don't understand very well this non-parametric, because it's not observable. No, they make some tricks. These people from non-parametrics to get there. And I'm not sure that I follow, but at some point we must believe on the experts. So then we have the bandwidth that is chosen, and the weights in the local regression for the values as you go further below the 0.8286 and further above, there are some weights. It's like a weighted least square, local weighted least square, and then people call this kernels. And the norm of the literature is we have 3 kernels. The one that's most used is called triangular now, that decrease the weights, but then they say also use uniform and Payout, and what we expect is that the results do not change with the other kernels, and we show that the robustness check that will not have time, that they don't change. And Payout, if you don't know, it's the triangle is like it's like a triangle. The uniform is a straight line, and the Payout is like a parable. Okay, so it's between the two. Then we have here the results that I think I will present and go to the conclusion, because I am time is up now. So let me explain here. So we have here the jump, or here in the traditional segment, and here is the Novo Mercado. The estimate is 0.2315, so they increase the probability. When you move from the left to the right, the probability of paying interest on equity increases by 23%. It's quite big. We have one start that is bad, that's 10%, but it goes here, the p-value gives more, makes it easier. It's very close to 5%. When you look at the fraction of interest on equities, then the number is the same, basically the same, is 22%, so big number as well. And then it's significant at 5%, so it's like 3% for the ones that are bothered by it. Here's the bandwidth value. So it's think of you are actually using data from 2286 minus 5.056 to 0.2286 plus 0.0056, and bandwidth it's a bit larger for the Novo Mercado. Here's the order of the polynomial for the local regression is 1. Then we have one that the order polynomial is 2. That doesn't change. And here's the number of observations that are actually used given the bandwidth. So it's quite balanced, and eliminate that part of the data with bad data like this does not affect the results. And so RDD is, in our case, is particularly important because of the errors of measurement in the tax rate. And it's showing, well, the agent's cost is here, the Novo Mercado is not here. It's for the fraction, and here is to quantify. How do we quantify now the agent's cost? The agent's cost is relevant for this interval, remember, no? So in this interval, here's the tax minimizing threshold. The firms as a large shareholder wants dividends here, and the tax minimizing should be interest on equity. So just reminding you what's the threshold is this one. So how do we proceed? For each firm in our sample, we say, what's the TC? What's the TC threshold? Does the TC lie on this interval? If it does, so there is conflict of interest. So what's the potential for agents cost if the agents cost exists? It's the payout net of taxes with the agents cost, that is this, with the tax minimizing rule. If you follow the tax minimizing rule, this is the tax that you pay minus the tax that you are paying according to the shareholders. So we do this for each firm in our sample. So the minimum agents cost should be close to zero. No, not surprised. There is some that are very close to the value maximization, must be zero basically. The maximum goes as far as 13.3%. That is huge. That so huge that we don't believe. No, it's a minor case. But if you take the average agents cost, it's 3.6%. So that what does this say? That the shareholder is saying, I want to pay dividends because I want, and this will reduce my taxes, and the tax of the firm as a whole will increase by 3.6%. That for me it's enough to say that it's huge, but maybe we should put here another thing like this: 3.6 times D over D plus E to put as a fraction of the value of the firm. Perhaps for some will be more appealing, but then we have to do. And no mercado, no agents cost. So that's the results. Say, and then it's validation. Perhaps I shouldn't say that. One thing for validation is that discontinuity should exist only on the taxes, and then we put all the other variables, no discontinuity. So if there is a discontinuity in one of this, then we could say we don't know if the discontinuity is the tax or this other thing that is going on. And the robustness check, I will move on, conclusion. So what do I think we get from this? So in the US, with some identification assumptions, people are finding evidence for agents crossing payout policy, and they are kind of concentrated in firms with poor incentives. That's the in Brazil, we have this neat experiment that allows us not to pay that much attention on the investment opportunities, and we can focus instead on the taxation. Doing that, we see that there are agents costs in Brazil in this payout policy in terms of choosing interest on equity and dividend. And the answer is yes, and it's large. It's not peanuts. It's 3.6, and this does not exist on the traditional segment. So what I like in terms of broader message for the literature on payout policy outside the US and UK is that substitution hypothesis that Schleif and others could not find relevant for these countries, they are important. It's not like this. It's not totally crazy here. But the problem is that that experiment was asking a lot for the measurement of the investment opportunities. When we lead like this, that I find very reasonable story of Alan, Bernardo, and Ivo Welch, that some firms will commit themselves not to do bad things because they want to lower the cost of capital, applies to the agents cost here, even if Novo Mercado is not such a great thing. But the self-selection approach might do. So that's the message of the paper.
Muito obrigado, Walter e Matheus. Uso muito perspicaz da realidade brasileira para identificar o modelo substitute model, né? A hipótese da substituição. Legal, gostei. Pessoal, a gente está A gente esgotou o tempo, mas quem quiser ficar por aqui para conversar com o Walter, você tem disponibilidade, certo, Walter?
Certo, sem problema.
Então mas obrigado, Walter e Matheus, excelente.